Hi everyone, Steven here. If you want to see how to install vCenter Server, this is vSphere 8 I'm going to be installing. Stick around, we're going to cover that. I just finished the video on setting up our NSX-T server, so we're going to install vCenter Server onto that right now. So stick around, we'll see you in a bit. Hi everybody, thanks for sticking around. So what we're going to do here is we're going to go through and install vCenter Server. Now vCenter Server, as I talked about in the first video, if you didn't watch that, you want to check that out. vCenter Server helps us manage our NSX-T servers and brings other stuff to the table as well, like clusters and vMotion and whatever. So what we need to do, I've set up my NSX-T server, my first one in the last video. And in my last video, you notice I gave it a second hard drive, a 200 gig drive. And that's where I'm going to install my vCenter Server. So vCenter Server is an appliance. And what is an appliance? An appliance is a pre-made virtual machine. Okay? So vCenter Server basically runs on, it's basically a Linux machine. Okay? It runs Proton, but it doesn't really matter. But it's basically a Linux VM. So I need to have a spot to run that VM. Remember, a VM is just a bunch of files, which we'll see. Anyways, so let me go over here and set this up. Let's log into my NSX-T server. Let's go into it. And because once we had our, now notice over here you see storage, it says there's nothing there, okay? You'll see it says no data stores have been configured, and I'm currently using the evaluation mode. There's no licenses, and it's going to expire in 60 days. We'll talk about all that stuff, but right now that's fine. So I need to create a data store. A data store is a volume where you store your VMs, okay? So notice again over here it says storage nothing, there's 0. So I'm going to click on storage, and I'm going to say new data store. Now remember I gave that NSX-T host a 200 gig disk. Okay, so I'm going to say create new virtual machine file system, new VMFS data store. I'll pick next. I'm going to give it a name, site-a-ensx-i-01-local. It's a local disk, and again, it found my 200 gig disk. I'm going to say next. It's asking, do you want to partition it or use the whole thing? I'm going to say use the whole thing. Notice it's asking, do you want to use VMFS 6 or VMFS 5? We'll talk about storage in a completely different video, but yeah, I'm going to leave this. I'm going to go next. I'm going to go finish. And it says, are you sure you want to partition this thing and blow away whatever's there? I'm going to say, yeah. And it goes through, and it's actually going to, come on, here we go, install it. So there we go. We've got our storage now set up. All right, let's kill that. And then now what I need to do is start the install of my vCenter Server appliance. So generally you would download the ISO from the VMware site. I'm going to go into vSphere. By the way, I get mine through vMug. I'm actually a member there. I forget the class, but anyways, and I get a lot of my stuff from there. So you'll see here the VMware VCSA, that's the vCenter Server Appliance. It's ISO. I'm going to right click on this thing and I'm going to say mount it. So I'm going to mount the ISO. Now you'll notice there's a couple of folders. The first one here is the command line installer. So you could do this from a command line if you wanted to, or you could do the user interface, the GUI installer. Hey, let's pick that. So these installers have actually been changed since over the years, and it's actually made things a lot easier to set up your vCenter Server. Now let's think about what we're doing here. I'm setting up vCenter Server to manage my host, and the vCenter Server is going to be a VM running on that host. It's almost like chicken and egg scenario, right? So this is why we're doing this order here. Let's double click on this. Notice now we have a folder for Linux, Macs, and Windows. So if I was on a Mac machine, I could run the installer from there, or a Linux machine, I could do it from there. I'm on a Windows box, so I'm going to run the installer from there. And then there's the installer. I double click on it. Come on. Now I could do a new install. This is what we want. I could do an upgrade, maybe from a previous version. I can migrate from an older vCenter Server used to run on Windows machines. So way back when, vCenter Server was a Windows application, and that's all it was. VMware then made a Linux-based VMware vCenter Server, which was a virtual machine. It was an appliance. So an appliance is a pre-made VM. Gone are today the only vCenter server is the appliance. There's no Windows version. So if you're, I can't see anybody still running this, but if you're still running vCenter server on a Windows, this allows you to migrate off of that. Or you can do a restore. Let's say you lost your vCenter server, it died, and you need to deploy a new one and then do a restore from a backup. Okay, we're not doing any of that. We're doing a fresh install. Now this is a two-stage process. The first one's just deploying the VM. The next one is configuring it. So that's why we're in stage 1 now. Stage 2 will be later. Again, go through, read the license agreement very carefully, folks. Accept it if you want to. Now it's asking you the ESXi or the vCenter server name. So it's asking you which host do you want to install this VM on? And I got here site A-ESXi01. That was the ESXi host I created back in that first video. If you didn't see that, watch it. Or what's it asking me? Or vCenter server name. Remember, I could have an environment that has multiple vCenter servers. So I could actually have this vCenter server being mounted in another vCenter server environment. It can get mind-boggling. But anyways, we're just going to leave it at this. So it shows me the ports and the root user. And it's going to reach out and hit that server, which it just did. But make sure you get the proper thumbprint here. And at that point, it's going to ask you, what do you want to call this VM? This is the name of the display name of the VM. Not the fully qualified domain name. It's just the display name. So I'm going to call it site A-vCenter Server Appliance-01. I'll set the, this is asking what password do you want on the root user for that appliance? So I'll type in my password. I'll confirm that password. And I'll go next. Now, you can deploy this in different sizes here, and it basically comes down to how many VMs do you want to manage in your environment. You don't really want to get stingy here, like, oh, I got 99 VMs. I'll go tiny, right? You probably want to go small. vCenter server likes memory. It's got a database, so to me, minimum would probably be a small deployment. I'm in my lab environment. Small or tiny looks perfect to me. I'm going to leave it at that. Okay. Now notice the disk. Says tiny's going to make a 600 gig disk, or almost 600 gig. Hang on a second. My other data store is only 200 gigs in size. Let's talk about that. Now go next. Now it's asking me, it looked at my host and it says what data stores are there, and it found my 200 gig data store. But hang on a second. This thing needs 600 gigs of disk. I'm going to enable thin disk mode. That means it's not going to allocate 600 gig right away. It's only going to allocate a very small amount, and it will increase over time. So in my lab environment, that's great. In production, I don't know. I got to watch what I say here. In production, I don't know if I would go thin disk. I'd rather allocate it all, so this way I know it won't have any problems. Also, thin disk, as it grows, it creates performance issues. So I'll leave that up to you. My lab environment, I'm going to go thin disk. I could also, the installer also can have me install on a new vSAN cluster containing target host. So if I got vSAN, or it can actually help me set up vSAN if I want to. We'll talk about vSAN in another video, but for now, this is what we're going to do. I click next. Now it's talking about what virtual network do you want this VM to plug into. By default, when you create your ESXi host, so as soon as you install it, it creates a virtual network for you. The first one here is a VM network, and that's the only one that's there. We'll talk in great detail on that in another video, but for now, I'm just going to plug it into there. What version of IP do you want on the vCenter Server Appliance? I'm going to do IP4, and do you want it static or DHCP? I'm going to say static. The fully qualified domain name, I can put that in there. You type in the IP address. I've already went through this installer once. That's why it's remembering these. So you type in the IP address of your vCenter server, subnet mask, the default gateway of your vCenter server, the DNS servers for that, and then the ports. Okay, and you'll click next. Gives you a summary, and at that point you hit finish. And right now it's going through stage 1. So this is going to take a little while to deploy. We're going to let it go through, and I'll probably speed this up for you. Okay, so you'll see us back in a bit. All right. Okay, so it didn't take too long. It went through. It says it deployed successfully. All we have to do is hit continue to get onto stage 2. It tells me here if you exit the installer, you can continue with the setup anytime by logging into the vCenter server management interface over here at port 5480. That's called the VAMI, V-A-M-I interface. Okay, I'm going to click continue, and then we wait. So now we're on stage 2. Let's click on next. Time synchronization mode is deactivated. I can say synchronize with the host or synchronize it with an NTP server. Probably a good idea to have it with an NTP server or the host, up to you. I'm going to type in my pool here, 0.ca.pool.ntp.org. I'm just going to type in the one. Do I want to allow SSH to go in? That's up to you. Look at your security policies. Maybe, you know, you're not allowed to. By the way, it just says for vCenter server high availability, activate SSH. I'll talk about what vCenter server high availability is in another video, so we're not going to look at that here. So I'm going to click on, I'm going to enable SSH. Check your security policies in your environment. I'm going to click on next. The next screen that it's going to come up, it should be asking us about single sign-on configuration, right? So we wait. So now it says single sign-on domain name. Notice it says vclass.local. It has a lightweight directory LDAP server. So basically you got to configure that. The default here is vSphere.local. Whatever yours is in your environment, you would set that up. You know, Acme Inc.local, whatever. I'm going to call this vSphere.local just because that's how we set it up in our lab. And I always like to have my stuff similar to the lab so I could actually demo it. It's asking me the single sign-on username. I'm going to see administrator, and then you would type in the password over here. And then I'm going to confirm the password. Do you want to join an existing domain? This is where you can actually have multiple vCenter servers, and we can do a thing called link mode. I'm going to do a separate video on that, but we're just getting things started here. It's our first setup, and that's all we care about. So I'm going to click on next. Now it talks about joining that customer experience improvement program. I'm going to leave that up to you if you want to, but there are some benefits to it with some online diagnostics and performance analysis and all that stuff. But you need to click this. You can say no now and do it later. My lab environment, I'm not going to join because it's a lab environment. And then it says it's ready to complete. All right, and I'm going to hit finish, and it says. You will not be able to pause or stop the install from completing once I click OK. So you're committing. So I'm going to say OK. And that's it. So it's going through doing its install. I'm going to leave it alone. And I'll probably speed this up. OK. So we'll see you back in a bit. Okay, so we see stage 2 is complete. It says click on the closed link below to get started. You can go over here to this link to kind of get started. So I'm just going to close this down, and that's basically it. I'm going to unmount my CD-ROM. Where's the eject? There we go. And that's it. So now I need to sign into the vCenter server. So let's try that out. Let's go into side-a-vCenter server appliance -01.vclass.local. These things usually take about 10 minutes to start up. Well, let's make sure. So there's the security warning. It's telling me there's a self-signed certificate there, so you can replace it. Maybe we'll do a video on that. I'm going to accept the risk, and it tells me to launch the vSphere client, right? And you can look at documentation. So I'm going to click on there, and then notice the link over here. It's the /UI. So now I'm going to sign in. And this is where the single sign-on account comes into play. So we had set it as administrator, and my domain was vSphere.local, and then password VMware. Well, that's my password. VMware 1 exclamation point. It's a lab environment, so I don't care. And I'm not going to say don't save this. So we just wait. And there we go. So it's coming in. See the user that I'm logged in at over here. We'll look at this, some more details on this stuff probably another video, but right now we got vCenter Server up and running, right? So one of the first things you're going to need to do is right click and say create a new data center. So that's the first thing you need to do. You can't add host, you need a data center. So I'm going to call it, again, you can have multiple data centers in here if you want. I'm just going to call it site A-data center. That's good enough for me, all right? And so I'll say okay. And at that point, you can start making folders and all that kind of stuff if you want to, right? I just want to add in my host. So let's add in my ESXi host. Okay, so I just want to add in my host. So let's right click on here, say add host. And then I'll type in my host, site A-ESXi-01.vclass.local. And we'll go next. It's asking me for username. It's root. And type in the password. Probably know what the password is. Doesn't matter. Comes up and gives me the certificate alert here. Is that the proper thumbprint? Yes or no, whatever. Yeah, it is. I memorized it. It comes up giving me a summary. Then it's asking, do you want to manage the host with a single image with Lifecycle Manager? I'm just going to basically say yes. I'm going to accept the default. We'll talk about Lifecycle Manager in another video. And then after that, it shows me the ESX version. It'll actually show me if there's vendor add-ons as well. I don't really have any. And again, it tells me the image can actually be customized later. This all goes with Lifecycle Manager. We'll talk about that later. Now it's asking me to assign a license. I can show you how to do that after the fact. In fact, that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm just going to say, yeah, whatever, evaluation mode is fine. I go next. And I will talk about lockdown mode. I'll go in more detail on this in a separate video because there's a lot of stuff you got to be aware of. But lockdown mode is, we discussed this in the first video. I could actually connect to the ESXi host using the host client interface, right? The host client, which you see me do, especially in this, or I can connect to vCenter Server. So what happens is, especially back in the old days, some people were like, oh, I'm going to bypass vCenter Server and just connect directly to host and start manipulating and creating my VMs, because that's what I'm used to. This was like years and years ago, right? And that confuses vCenter Server, and it's really considered bad practice, right? So lockdown mode is a way for you to say, no, 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 you're not allowed to do that. The only way to manage this host is to go through vCenter Server, which is a good thing. There are times when you do want to connect directly to the host. Like, for example, what happens if vCenter Server is not available and you need to connect to the host where vCenter is in order to do troubleshooting or start it up or whatever. And I'll talk about lockdown mode in a separate video because there's more to it than just that. I'm just going to say disable, leave it alone. I don't care. I'll go next. It talks about the location. If I had folders, I could create folders to put that in. I'm just going to leave it in my Site A data center I created. And then over here it says ready to complete, and I'll go finished. And I'm going to say never ask me again. So it's actually adding that standalone host. And I can actually repeat that process. So let me add in more hosts. And I'm going to speed this up. Okay, so that's it. You see, I've added actually 3 hosts in here, right? I haven't set up any licensing or anything like that. I can go into vSphere, up here, they call that the hamburger menu, whatever, the horizontal lines. I'm going to go under administration, and under administration you see licenses. And right now I'm using evaluation licenses, but I can go in and add licenses. I'm not going to go through this whole demo, but you add the license for your vCenter server, then you add the license for your ESXi hosts, and then once you've done that, you go into your assets and you'll see your vCenter server, and you would select it and say assign the license. Right now I'm in evaluation mode. I'm not going to demo that because I don't want my license going all over YouTube, right? And I can go to my host and then assign the licenses there, right? Pick my host and assign the licenses. I'm not going to worry about this. 60-day eval is good enough for me for this type of stuff. But that's essentially it. There's a lot more to vCenter, which we'll cover. There's a lot more stuff to go through here. Before we start creating virtual machines, actually, if I open this up here, you'll see there's a virtual machine there. It's on that ESXi01. And it's on its local storage. So what we'll probably end up doing next is we'll probably add shared storage, and then we'll get into actually what we'll probably do next is networking. I'll talk about networking, then we'll get into our shared storage, and then we'll start creating VMs, okay? And then we'll get into really cool stuff after that. But anyways, that's it, folks. Hit that subscribe button if this is stuff you're interested in. Leave comments down below on, hey, stuff that you might want to see. And if you found this entertaining, hit that thumbs up button. But that's it. Thanks very much. We'll see you soon. Bye now.